people that worked at the hospital still claim to this day that the body they brought in was not Elvis Presley.
They were going to steal, in effect, Elvis's body.
So I orchestrated, put together, and carried out the Elvis Presley body snatching.
All right, there's an Elvis party in 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Just running scared each place we go, so afraid that he might show. You're running scared. What would I do if he came back and won't let you? Just running scared, feeling low, running scared. You love him so. Just running scared, afraid to lose. If he came back, which one would you choose? And all at once he was standing there, so sure of himself, his head in the air. My heart was breaking, which one would it be? You turn around and walk away with
Outside the Pentagon, CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre. And Jamie, you got very close to where that plane went down.
That's right, Judy. A while ago, I walked right up to next to the building. Firefighters were still trying to put out the blaze. The fire, by the way, is still burning in some parts of the Pentagon. And I took a look at the huge gaping hole that's in the side of the Pentagon. But from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate.
Bottom line, in my professional opinion, based on my years of experience, my study of airline accidents and incidents, it's my opinion that a Boeing 757 did not hit the Pentagon. There would be an abundance of wreckage, and that the official sources have not been able to produce the evidence of any wreckage. Large tail sections, indestructible landing gear, indestructible engines, wing spars, fuselage, seats, anything of the sort indicates to me that a 757 did not hit the Pentagon.
In relation to the Pentagon, it's quite obvious that no Boeing 757 hit the building. There are multiple lines of reasoning that support that conclusion, including, for example, the complete lack of massive debris of the kinds and character that would be expected from a 100-ton airliner with a 125-foot wingspan and a tail that stands 44 feet above the ground. The hit point was only about 10 feet high and 16 or 17 feet wide on the ground floor. You find unbroken windows, undamaged fence, a couple of automobiles. What you don't find is massive piles of aluminum debris. You don't find the wings, you don't find the seats, the bodies, the luggage, the tail. Not even the engines were recovered, indicating that no Boeing 757 hit the building.
You've got a hole that's no more than 10 foot high and about maybe 15 to 20 feet wide that we're expected to believe a multi-tonned 757 jetliner with a wingspan of 125 feet and a tail height of 44 feet, that's 4 stories, folks, somehow managed to squeeze through this one little bitty hole in the ground floor of the Pentagon.
Before the outer wall collapsed, which was about 45 minutes after initial impact, there was only one hole, about 14 to 16 feet. And supposedly, the 757 completely penetrated this hole without leaving any indication of where the wings would have penetrated. Adjacent to this hole, the windows were completely intact, and you can tell by the firefighters' foam that was sprayed around the hole and sticking to the windows. The windows are completely intact, both adjacent where the wings should have penetrated and knocked the windows out, and also directly above the hole where the elevated tail section would have penetrated. You know, the windows are completely intact.
I measured pieces of Soviet equipment from photographs. It was my job. I look at the hole in the Pentagon, and I look at the size of an airplane that was supposed to have hit the Pentagon, and I said, the plane does not fit in that hole. So what did hit the Pentagon? What hit it? Where is it? What's going on?
I know from my experience that it would have been highly improbable that even a seasoned American test pilot, a military test pilot, could have flown a T-category aircraft like the 757 into the first floor of the Pentagon because of a thing called ground effect.
The official trajectory has this plane just skimming the ground at about 500 miles an hour as it impacts with the building on the ground floor. That turns out to be aerodynamically impossible. Even a small plane, such as a Cessna at full throttle, would accumulate a packet of compressed gas, which is there beneath the fuselage, that would make it impossible for it to get closer than 15 feet to the ground. Discussions with aeronautical engineers have convinced me that for a Boeing 757 at 500 miles an hour, it could not get closer than 60 feet to the ground. If the plane had been taking the official trajectory, its engines would have been making massive damage to the lawn. Wake turbulence would have been wrecking it. The lawn would have been a mess. Instead, the lawn is perfectly smooth, green and smooth, which turns out to be, ironically, a smoking gun at the Pentagon.
Ground effect and the pristine condition of the lawn in front of the Pentagon aren't the only problems with the official story. The airline pilots that we talked with also have a very serious problem as to whether or not terrorists that were trained on small aircraft were even capable of maneuvering a large commercial airliner at such a high speed and making these very precise maneuvers.
I flew the 2 actual aircraft which were involved in 9/11, the flight number 175 and flight 93, the 757 that allegedly went down at Shanksville, and flight 175 is the aircraft that's alleged to have hit the South Tower. I don't believe it's possible for, like I said, for a terrorist, a so-called terrorist, to train on a 172, then jump in the cockpit of a 757, 767 glass cockpit, and vertical navigate the aircraft, lateral navigate the aircraft, and fly the airplane at speeds exceeding its design limit speed by well over 100 knots, make high-speed, high-bank turns, pulling probably 5, 6, 7 Gs, and the aircraft would literally fall out of the sky. I couldn't do it, and I'm absolutely positive they couldn't do it.
Hey, the new Bruce Willis movie Looper opens this weekend, and in which Willis's character is sent back in time to kill himself. Well, most scientists say time travel isn't possible.
But a Washington attorney claims he's done it dozens of times as part of a secret Cold War project. KOMO 4's Matt Markovich has his story.
We eliminate people from the future.
In the movie Looper, Bruce Willis is hunted down by a younger version of himself.
Time travel has not yet been invented, but 30 years from now, it will have been.
Time travel, Hollywood science fiction? Or is it?
I have physically traveled in time.
Andrew Bashago is not acting.
We have. We did over 40 years ago.
Fascinating. The Vancouver, Washington attorney is on a mission to reveal what he calls a 40-year government cover-up of Project Pegasus.
Piece of them anyway.
Where he says he was teleported back and sideways in time dozens of times.
It would be a fascinating project.
I have the whole story. I have hundreds of facts. I can tell you what personnel were at what locations where which time travel device was being used.
And his time travel wasn't recent. It was when he was a kid.
I entered the program officially in the fall of 1969 as a third grader, age 7.
One of 140 kids, 60 adults, chrononauts as he calls them, including his dad, who joined him on his first jump.
My dad held my hand and we jumped through the field of energy, and we seemed to be moving very rapidly. But there was also a paradox. We seemed to be going nowhere at all.
Hold on tight, son. The TV show Fringe aired a similar scene 2 years ago. Coincidence?
Did it?
There's paradoxes, unscientific claims, unbelievable stories and encounters on Earth and Mars. Meeting Barack Obama when the president was a teenager with a different name.
Fascinating.
Time traveling 6 times to the Ford Theater on the day President Lincoln was shot, but he didn't see it happen. And we're not done with Lincoln.
In fact, during one probe, the one to the Gettysburg Address, I was dressed as a Union Bugle Boy.
That's right, he was at the Gettysburg Address. He says this famous picture taken that day proves it. He says this Bugle Boy is him. It's the only visual evidence he provides for any of his travels. That's it.
I was physically at Gettysburg.
Crazy way to travel, spreading a man's molecules all over the universe.
And what about that teleportation? He says Star Trek got it wrong.
So Andy, I just got here via Star Trek teleportation, but that's not how you did it.
No, in fact, if you had just arrived via quantum teleportation, the Star Trek method of teleportation, you would have collapsed as a dead person.
Bashago weaves his tale with such conviction, I thought he's either a psychopathic liar, lunatic, or the fastest thinking science fiction writer on Earth.
A tunnel was opening up in time-space, just like you'd have a cavity inside a soap bubble being blown by a child. And when that bubble closed, we had been repositioned elsewhere in time-space on the face of the Earth.
Some would say Bashago is still living in a bubble, but he's put his professional reputation at risk claiming time travel isn't science fiction. He did it.
Please, Spock, do me a favor, and don't say it's fascinating. No. But it is interesting.
Matt Markovich, KOMO 4 News.
It was hard for us to confirm any of Andrew's claims. Still, he says many out there say they believe Project Pegasus was real.
and words are all I have to take your heart away.
Well, I think the first thing that we should distinguish for today's presentation is that Project Pegasus, under the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, was the U.S. time-space program at the time of its emergence in the mid to late 1960s. I was initially brought into Project Pegasus by my late father, Raymond F. Bashaga, who was a special projects engineer for the Ralph M. Parsons Company, which was the principal U.S. defense contractor involved in Project Pegasus. Sometime between September of 1967 and 68, he took me up to the old Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Wood Ridge, New Jersey. And there in Building 68 was a Tesla teleporter. It basically consisted of two gray-colored parenthesis-shaped booms that were called armatures, between which was broadcast a shimmering curtain of radiant energy. And my father explained that when we jumped through that field of energy, we would enter a tunnel in time-space, and when that tunnel closed several seconds later, we would find ourselves somewhere else in the country. And so we jumped through that field of energy, and we found ourselves in something that looked like a bluish-white tunnel, such as people report in the near-death experience. We were clearly moving at a great rate of speed, but also there was a sense that we weren't moving at all, that the universe was being wrapped around us. And when the tunnel closed, we found ourselves in the location where we were teleporting to for really the next 5 years, which was Santa Fe, New Mexico. The state capitol grounds at Santa Fe were being used by Project Pegasus as the collection area for people who were teleporting into New Mexico from different teleports around the country. My dad took me to a few other defense contractor locations in New Jersey there in my first and second grade of elementary school. And then I was brought officially into Project Pegasus in the fall of 1969, which for me was the beginning of the third grade. I was 7 and then quickly turned age 8 around the time that I signed basically a loyalty oath on Defense Department letterhead. That was in approximately early October of 1969, shortly after we know the lunar landing of July 20th, 1969. And for the next 3 years, in real time, I was involved in a range of time travel activities under the aegis of DARPA that Project Pegasus was then involved in. Everything from conventional remote viewing of distant targets in real time, which is a form of psychic time travel, all the way to through the form of physio-virtual time travel that chronovisors allow, where you're immersed in a hologram and you find yourself in a past or future location, all the way through various forms of physical time travel, such as Tesla teleportation and other methodologies that were being developed to bodily teleport somebody to another location in time-space.
Now, you have also seen a documentary, reportedly of chronovised images of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. Could you comment on that?
Right. Just as I had the opportunity to go to Gettysburg, and I did end up seeing Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, I was very crestfallen about that. But because I had performed ably and well in Project Pegasus for the 3 years that I was officially enrolled, when I was in New Mexico living with my father in the summer of 1972, he invited his... So my father had the opportunity to invite several people to a screening of a 20 to 30 minute black and white documentary film, again the 16mm documentary film stock of that era. And there were about, and this was at the Sandia National Labs outside of Albuquerque, where Connie lived and worked. And there were about maybe 15 of us, all of us attached to work that was then going on at the labs in some way. And we watched as the film captured a hologram of the crucifixion of Jesus. And as a child who had taken First Communion and was attending Sunday school at a local Benedictine Catholic parish in Cedar Knolls, New Jersey, Notre Dame of Mount Carmel Church, I certainly could identify that everything that happened in that 20 to 30 minutes of film was consistent with the accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus that are found in the New Testament. Jesus, in the images, was crucified with nails having been driven into his wrists and pinning one foot over the other. He was on about a 14-foot pole that was about as thick as a contemporary telephone pole. There was a placard above his head that said INRI. He was wearing a crown of thorns that was very full and was very jagged and had been pushed on top of his head, causing rivulets of blood to have streamed down his forehead and cheeks. He was a Caucasian male with a sort of an aquiline nose and a thin, gaunt face who was in extreme pain. His mouth was agape. He had a very bushy, dark brown beard and long hair, and a very emaciated body type. He was approximately, I would say, about 5'10", but very thin. And the events that were going on around him that we could see, and actually in separate images, the images were strobing, as if the chronovisor had tapped different locations around Jesus' cross, included women coming and praying at the foot of his cross before being driven out of the area by Roman centurions. I remember seeing what must have been Longinus holding the end of his spear and leaping up to pierce Jesus' side, which is consistent with the biblical account. The sky grew dark at one point. So, from the perspective of a Catholic Sunday school participant, what had been recorded apparently was consistent with what had been recorded in the different New Testament accounts of the crucifixion. When we left the screening, my dad turned to Connie Chavez and said, "Connie, I don't know why you're reacting like this." She had been just squirming out of her seat. She couldn't watch it. She was covering her eyes at one point, sometimes looking through her fingers. And she turned to my father and said, "Ray," she was a very devout Catholic who was always helping the nuns there at the San Felipe de Neri Church in Old Town Albuquerque. And she said, "Ray, they were crucifying my Lord. How do you expect me to act?" And he said, "I know, Connie, but we also have images." He said, "My team retrieved images that 3 days later, there's a flash of light in Jesus' crypt, 2 angels appear, Jesus stands up, and all 3 of them push the stone away, and Jesus walks out of his crypt." And she said, "You're kidding, Ray." And he says, "No, we also have images of the resurrection of Jesus." Now, I don't say that to proselytize, but just to share what I experienced in that setting. Now, that begs the question of what was being accessed by a chronovision that led to the production of that film. It was either the actual crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, or it was the actual imagery of another European male of his age and general appearance among the 600 men fitting that description who were crucified by the Roman Empire around the time that Jesus of Nazareth was, or it was a synthetic recording of the crucifixion of Jesus or another man that was stored somewhere.